Welcome to HR.com Live. This podcast is produced by HR.com, the #1 destination to help 1.7 million HR executives maximize human potential and drive extraordinary business results.
Good afternoon and welcome to HR.com Live. My name is Dr. Heidi Scott and I am the Chief Learning Officer at HR.com. My goal is to ensure that our learning ecosystem remains innovative as we equip HR professionals with the tools they need to navigate their careers and make them smarter. I'll be your host for today, and in this episode, we're going to be talking with Brian Fretwell. And we're going to be talking about how the employer and employee relationships are changing. Brian is a master facilitator, author, and professional leadership and culture speaker. He's an in-demand master facilitator for some of the biggest companies in the world. And in the last 10 years, he's helped over 25,000 people with changing people challenges around the world. He helps companies create the behavior change in their employees that will meet future company needs in leadership, safety, and communication. Now back to our discussion on how employer and employee relationships are changing. Brian, I'm really glad to have you with us today and look forward to talking with you.
Yeah, thanks. I love when somebody reads that bio, because I feel like the bio is just he talks for a living, because when he went to school, they said he doesn't stop talking, and now I just make a living at that. So
isn't that awesome? See,
it makes it sound really important. It's
yeah,
great.
you probably went from the third grade boy at the back of the room being disciplined for talking so much, and who knew that was going to be your lifelong gig?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
Well, on this topic, what's part of your story that led you to consider the need for us to pay attention to the changes in the concept of social contracts?
Yeah, so really kind of getting kicked in the teeth a lot, to be honest with you. And like so many other people's experience going through 2008, in the course of 4 years, I lost a business. I took a newly created position that had never been imagined before. It was actually my title inside of a company was Dream Manager. And then that company eventually folded. I hope those two aren't connected. But then jumped on with a company that had been owned by the same person for 40 years. And within 2 years, that company was then sold. And just seeing over and over again, you know, this idea that we used to have, I call it sort of this industrial hangover we have of okay, I'm going to go to a company, I'm going to be there my whole life, or I'm going to even progress in this company and move up 2 or 3 levels, is just less and less the reality that we see out there on the employee side, but also on the employer side. And so I think it requires us to sort of relook at how we approach both of those relationships.
So when we use the term social contracts, just if you could crystallize that definition that just makes sense to everyday people like me.
Yeah, so I used to say, and my father used to work up at Bunker Hill, up in northern Idaho, at the mines up there, and the contract that he had, or and when I say social contract, it's that implied, okay, what we're here for is he was going to show up there. And he was going to have to put up with stuff. It was going to be hard work. He was going to have to really push through, but he could expect to retire. He could expect to sort of be cared for. There was a safety net, if you will, as long as he, drove through some of the challenges that they knew were going to be there. Well, now that if you want to call it a safety net, or those assurances just aren't out there anymore. I mean, the average life of a Fortune 500 company in 1995 was 25 years. Today, it's less than 10. Average tenure of a company, as every HR person will tell you, is about 2.5 years per employee. 20% of the jobs that we have today didn't exist 15 years ago, and that number is going to double and just go in. What we have is still this idea, like people still talk that, I want to go find a career that I can be at for a long time. Well, they don't exist as much anymore. And companies still approach it of, asking an employee, where do you want to be in 10 years? And having not been an employee for a while, I think I might answer that question. Well, do you guys know if you're going to exist in 10 years? Because that's just the reality of the economy we live in. And so how we approach that, we have to really take a deep look at some of the assumptions under that.
Well, as we think about HR leaders, we want to retain great talent. And what are your thoughts? I mean, the more that we get from our teams, what are some strategies that you recommend that we utilize?
Yeah, so HR is on the front lines of this, and I talk with HR leaders all the time who are really true, who really kind of understand it and are trying to push the focus on, if you will, soft skills. But I think really two specific ones. It's how we're approaching each other every day. I call it, less of a focus on what we call cause maps or let's do problem solving, and more of a focus on, okay, if something successful happened, if our team operated successfully, do we know how and why that happened? And do they know how and why that happened? I always say people and machines aren't the same. We can do problem solving on a machine because the machine operates at a high level almost every time. Well, human, right, organisms are a little bit different. Like if any sports team, they operate on the highest level, but it's only in, like, even in a football game, it might be one quarter. And so they have to go and look at that to say, how do we replicate that in 4 quarters? So how do we have as much analysis on what went right as we do on what went wrong, so that we know what to reinforce and to push? But for most managers out there, their skill set is really telling people what went wrong. And again, that I always call that the industrial hangover. That you can do that as long as there's other expectations that are being met on the employee. But because those other expectations or assumptions aren't there, we have to be really mindful about what's been going right. And are we meeting to that 6-to-1 positive to negative feedback ratio that is so important?
I love everything you just shared. And I'm thinking as an HR leader, I mean, we want to retain our people, and it sounds like what you're talking about has a good deal to do with appreciative inquiry, finding what's going well. Can you bring it into some really concrete, what are some concrete strategies you would recommend to us when we think about how do we help our team focus on what went well? How do we extract out and so that we can replicate?
So it's really appreciative inquiry is a great deep kind of strategy and structural process. For me, it's about the interactions we have on a daily basis, and where the process came from, or rather where my focus of it came from, is my wife is a counselor, and she talks all the time about validation. And so when somebody comes in and they explain, here's what's going on, your job is to listen and validate the experience. And what that does in the person's brain is allow them to kind of settle down and say, I've been heard. And the number one thing I hear, workshop to workshop to workshop around the world, the most common response I get from people is them saying, I feel like I'm just a number here. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I would be retired 5 years ago. And so when I'm talking so the impact of that, or rather the application of that, is really about, are we, or rather the question of what's going right is really about being validated. What have you done? What are you contributing? And for my job as a leader to stop and listen to it. It doesn't have to be, I talk about success cause maps and diving deep down in there, but it's really about, like, the more powerful is the day-to-day. Was the employee heard? Did I have a chance to say, here's what I think I'm contributing, here's what I think I'm doing, and then the manager can then validate that or can redirect that. But so many times the conversation is just manager to employee, and they don't ever have a chance to be heard in the organization. And that starts to create so many other things that disallow us to build a foundation for then doing process improvement, to doing feedback, to doing. You can't give feedback until somebody's heard, at least if you want it to be effective.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think that really for our members, HR professionals at every level, practicing, whether you're a manager or a leader of anyone formally or not, that habit of validating, the habit of listening is, boy, I guess that I love what you're saying. It certainly resonates with me and my leadership style and the way I want to be listened to and validated.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you use that word habit. Drucker said culture eats strategy for breakfast, but what he's talking about, and I think what we miss on that, is culture is the habits. The validation is a habit. It's a daily activity I can do, and I can do it in a ton of different ways. I can ask questions, I can point out, I can do those, but the habit is much more important than the strategy. So if I have really being able to understand as a leader, what are the daily habits that are allowing my employees to be heard, that is building the psychological safety, that is creating the core, so that when everything continues to change, we still have these base strategies. The sports example, we do it all the time. You dribble every day in practice if you're a basketball player. It's not part of the strategy, but without it, the strategy never works. Right. And so as leaders, what are the daily habits that are helping to build culture, right? And can you measure them? Do people understand them?
Yeah. When you think about a team in the field, again, across industries, but for our HR professionals who are leaders of some sort, what's the most dangerous problem that you find in working with teams that are actually out in the field, whatever it is they do?
Yeah, it's a real easy answer. The number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is psychological safety. Like it's not the problems that we have out in the field, it's the inability to talk about the problems. That it stymies entire organizations. We get silos. I can't talk from this group to this group, or within a team, I can't bring up what I think is going wrong, or because we just have this interaction that I'm afraid if I say something, we're going to be in trouble. And that goes back to those habits. We don't have a daily interaction where we talk about what's going right, so that we can then talk about what's going, potentially wrong. And psychological safety is like a muscle. If that's not developed on a daily basis, it's much easier to break than it is to build, right?
And beyond listening and validating those we work with, what's another action-oriented strategy that we can consider employing to create psychological safety in our teams?
Yeah, so when we do focus on improvement or problem solving, the language that we use, and I try to teach that, what do we know we can improve? And so really starting that interaction with a team or employee, saying, what do we know? Because I want to tap into, what is that person actually confident about? What do they actually believe we can improve? Not what do we need to improve? What do we know we can improve? How we address growth and improvement using kind of like Carol Dweck language, like growth mindset language, that those two so tie into that psychological safety. If we can't talk about the problem, and if I don't have people that are able to come and say what they can do about a problem, then we're just going to be dancing around and pointing fingers all day long, because all we're trying to do is protect ourselves as individuals.
So for HR leaders today, what are new competitive advantages that we need to be leveraging?
The competitive advantage is culture. It kind of always has been, but I think it is just so much more so today, in as much as, yes, we have these strategies and directions, but how are we building a team? And how do we know on a daily basis that every person on this team's number one job is building that team? So that if we have a reorg next week, if we have a buyout next week, or if we're in a completely different industry next week, the core, that stability, that structure can move. Because when that core is gone, and I believe most people have experienced this, then when that change comes in, it's every person for themselves. And it costs time, it costs energy, and it can cost a whole business.
I think this conversation, Brian, as I'm listening to you, what's hitting me is the fact that we've been living in economic safety for almost 11 years of a good time, economically. And not to be a doomsayer, because that's not me, but it's also, you got to look at it and go, can't last forever. I mean, that's
sure
what we see. And so I think some of the strategies that you've talked about, that we better be getting a hold of these now, because it's much easier now when we don't have so many stresses that the economy is pressing upon us in our organizations.
Well, and that because you use that word certainty and safety, and safety for an individual is knowing that my position is safe, and a reorg or a buyout can put that in jeopardy. And so even in good times, we have those challenges, because good times sometimes speed up those change processes. And our brains are just wired to identify danger in much bigger ratios than they are to identify what's going right, or rather the safety part of that. And so as managers, we have to direct the attention towards where there is certainty.
Yeah, and now you've written a book. What's your most recent book title? Just, I know you're not, but I want to know, what is it?
Experts of Our Potential.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, so it's a look at how we as individuals bring value to an organization.
Well, that's going to be one on my bookshelf soon, so I look forward to reading that. What's another, if there's another must-read book that you recommend HR leaders pick up and get a hold of regarding the concepts we've just talked about? What is that?
Yeah, I always go to Thinking Fast and Slow, and I'll apologize in advance because it's 700 pages and it's a really deep dive. But I think when you just talked about that safety, and he really focuses on system 1 and system 2, but just sort of how the brain processes kind of information, I think really opens our eyes to, oh, wow, how do we get people to be able to access the part of their brains that allow them to bring the most, to their job on a daily basis? For me, I've read it 3 times now because I'm a little nerdy and it's my industry, wow. But it's great.
You're speaking from one nerd to another, so I welcome the recommendation. Well,
fantastic.
Thank you, Brian, for taking the time to share your experience and insights with us. And thank you, everyone, for watching. And don't forget to check out our archive episodes on HR.com. We release new episodes every day, so you can stay up to date on all things HR. Have a great day, and cheers.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to HR.com Live.